Hi, and welcome to Full Circle. This is a sustainability program at Cable 14 here at the City of Fort Collins, and we're excited today to have our guest, Judy Dorsey, who is the Executive Director of the Colorado Clean Energy Cluster. Welcome, Judy.
Thank you, Emily.
And we're also here with Bruce Hendy, who's our Chief Sustainability Officer at the City of Fort Collins. Welcome, Bruce.
Thank you.
And one of the things we wanted to talk about today is net zero cities, because that's been on a lot of people's minds. And Bruce, I was hoping you could talk a little bit first to introduce us to why the city is involved in this and what Net Zero Cities is.
Sure. Yeah, thank you. You know, it actually began a couple of years. The idea came up about 3 years ago. And as probably much of the public knows, that climate action and sustainability in our community is a value that's pretty deeply held, and it's been held for well over 20 years. And as we formed Sustainability Services, which is a specific area of the city, to try and address climate action and other issues, it really became apparent that this was a long-term objective of ours. And probably starting with a project that actually came out of a community grassroots organization called University Connections, that gave rise to an endeavor called Fort Zed, which was a zero energy district. And Judy's been a part of that as we've developed it and helped foster that whole endeavor. And the Clean Energy Cluster now is a big part of Fort Zed. So as we started down that path of Fort Zed and started having those meetings, we really began the discussion about what does that mean and how can we advance the overall task of creating a zero energy district. And from that arose the idea of bringing together partners from around the world that are tackling this kind of an endeavor and trying to really bring together a significant carbon reduction strategy. And that's both in energy and water, by the way. It started as energy, and I think now it's kind of emerged into water as well, because there's a strong relationship between the two. And so that gave rise to last year's first Net Zero Cities meeting, which Judy can kind of probably give you a little bit about the Clean Energy Cluster and how that has played into the net zero and the audience that we're expecting.
Yeah, Judy, can you talk a little bit about the role of the cluster in setting this up? And this event is October 23rd and 24th at the Lincoln Center, and it's free to the public. What do people, talk a little bit about your involvement with the cluster and why people should go to something like this?
Yeah. Right, October 23rd and 24th, and free. We have 70 speakers from 10 countries, all practicing in different aspects of net zero energy, carbon, and water. So we're very excited. The Colorado Clean Energy Cluster is the host of the event. And those who know us and what we're about, our mission is around economic development, at the intersection of economic development and sustainability, in particular clean energy and water innovation. So we rallied behind and are a host of Net Zero Cities because it advances a lot of the concepts that we're working on with our initiatives. Our initiative one, our flagship and first major initiative being Fort Zed that Bruce described. Our other major initiative is called the International Clean Tech Network, where we're trying to help Colorado companies grow by helping provide them access to markets that are friendly to the types of net zero technologies and products and services that Colorado is growing here in our state. So we're also excited that Net Zero Cities is in conjunction with the Colorado Clean Energy Cluster hosting the International Clean Tech Network. So we'll have our cluster plus 9 other clusters from throughout Europe, North America, and Asia joining us for that event.
And now, if I recall, the Colorado Clean Energy Cluster really helped start the International Clean Tech Network. Is that correct? Was that started here?
It was started here, and the 2 founding partners are Colorado and the Copenhagen Clean Tech Cluster. So Copenhagen, in its own right, is really a world leader in net zero, one of the first to prove out net zero carbon or carbon neutrality. And so they'll be here with a pretty significant delegation of the cluster plus some startup companies in Copenhagen, as well as their university and their incubator. So we're pretty excited about the group coming to the event.
So talk a little bit about the 70 speakers who are coming. Who are people going to hear from? Who are some of the leaders in their fields outside of some of these international folks who are speaking?
Well, I think one of the perhaps the most significant political figures is Senator Udall, who will provide an opening introduction to the event, which I think is very significant. He's a very strong advocate of the work that we're doing, so we're really thrilled to have Senator Udall speaking. And we also will have several representatives from the Environmental Protection Agency, both at the national and the regional level. And we're really excited to have them speaking on behalf of climate action. And I think this kind of is a logical follow-on from President Obama's climate action plan, which was announced earlier this year. And so I think that's a couple of good ones. We also have, and Judy can talk a little bit about some of our international visitors, but we also have speakers coming from around the country, people that are all of these folks are heavily engaged in the work that we're doing, that the work they're doing, and they're really colleagues in the industry that are all approaching net zero and trying to find ways to accomplish that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so in addition to those that Bruce mentioned, we have two keynote speakers. Steve Maxwell is the author of The Future of Water, and he is the keynote on the first day to really highlight the energy-water nexus and the interrelationship between the two. And on the second day, our keynote speaker is coming from London, the world global practice leader in smart cities from Schneider Electric, Charbel Aoun. So we're pretty excited about that on the second day. From the keynotes, then we have 12 sessions across 4 tracks in net zero energy, net zero water, transportation innovations, and smart cities. So each of those tracks has sessions where the speakers are in each session either a Colorado expert, a national expert, or an international expert. So the audience will get a really rich experience in every single session to see all 3 of those perspectives. Our speakers the majority are either the executive directors of their organizations, the presidents, vice presidents, or some kind of world practice leaders in some of the leading efforts around smart cities. We have Fort Zed in Colorado. Well, there are analogous programs and projects from our partners in Denmark, for example, or in France and Italy, et cetera.
Yeah, if I can add to that also, one of the really exciting parts about this is the ability to begin to think regionally. We've got the mayor of Boulder, the city manager of Boulder coming. We also have the mayor of Loveland who will be here, and their senior energy representatives will be attending. And Fort Collins will also have the mayor of Cambridge, Massachusetts, who's coming to talk about their plan, and the sustainability director from Salt Lake, the sustainability director from Copenhagen. So I think the kind of really fun part about that for me is that we really are seeing elected officials and appointed officials really taking up this notion of net zero and pursuing it.
Mm-hmm.
Well, go ahead.
I was going to say, even to build on that, then the idea was to have the triple bottom line woven and integrated throughout. So we have the public and people side of sustainability, the technical, and then the economic. So there are representatives it won't just be like a techno geek out fest for 2 days. It really is intended to be a very rich and strong environment for advancing the community-based efforts that are happening across the globe in net zero.
Well, and we should point out that, as you mentioned, Bruce, it's not just the city of Fort Collins that's sponsoring this. It's the cities of Boulder, Loveland, and Fort Collins.
Yeah.
And that's something we plan to do not just this year, but into the future. Is that correct?
That is right. In fact, next year it'll be hosted by the city of Boulder, and the year after that by Loveland. And for me, that's a pretty powerful message.
So if you're attending this conference as someone who's not in the industry, like Judy, you were just mentioning, what can you learn from this? How can you apply, net zero in your life? I mean, we talk about the concept, I guess maybe we should back up and just say, what do we mean when we say net zero energy? What is that?
Yeah, one thing I would say about net zero is it sounds counterintuitive, because why would anybody want zero of something, right? And paradoxically, zero equals prosperity. That's what people should really take home. That when we look at sustainability and how to be, let's say, less bad, that is just a paradigm around less bad and almost feels punitive. But if you switch it around completely to net zero impact, it changes the paradigm and the pathways to get there so completely that it opens up a whole different opportunity and viewpoint around prosperity. So first and foremost, we want people to embrace zero as actually growth of a great thing. And in terms of what it means to people, I think the audience and maybe the listeners out there to this show would really start to better understand their own contributions. What is your footprint for how you conduct your life, and what are your opportunities and understanding of living within the means of the resources available to you, economically, socially, environmentally, whether it's carbon, water, energy, financial resources, et cetera. So it's a really wonderful concept that can scale from the individual to the building. We'll have some of the leading designers talking about net zero, a very high profile net zero public building in Salt Lake City, for example, to districts like Fort Zed, to whole cities like Copenhagen. So those are the most important things and exciting things to me, is it's very scalable and it's very inspiring for a positive future for all of those reasons.
And go ahead, Bruce.
I think I've told Judy this before, but I actually think we're in a bit of a renaissance here. And it's not only good from a standpoint of the environment, but it's economically good. It's economically good because it gives us the opportunity to reinvest in new strategies. We've been following this paradigm that started in the 1950s, which was use more energy, use more energy, use more energy, and we've never questioned that. And now I think we're getting to a stage where culturally we're ready to embrace a shift. And that shift is starting now, and our opportunity to play in that arena and be a part of that, I think, is a really inspiring one.
Well, and this is something that's happening around the U.S. You start to see, articles in the paper about a net zero neighborhood or net zero communities. Where else in the country is this happening? You mentioned some of the other countries that are doing this, but what about in the U.S.? Are we one of the few, or what's happening around the country?
Yeah, well, that's what the purpose of Net Zero Cities is too, is to really look at this intersection at city scale and net zero. And so you can find really great examples of what's happening at different levels, but to wholly say an entire city net zero energy, I don't know of any specific example. There are some, and you'll hear the story about Copenhagen when they come, when we start talking about carbon and carbon neutrality. So there's certainly a lot happening at different scales. I would say that that's the point, though, too, is it's at that leading edge of innovation. So I also sometimes hearken back to, let's say, Plan Fort Collins, innovate, sustain, connect. Well, that's what this is about. It's about pushing innovation while it's percolating or becoming on the minds of across the U.S. Let's be a global practice leader in that here in our region. Innovate, sustain, it's around sustainability and net zero, and then connect. It is an environment where we need to start really collaborating with others shoulder to shoulder, even though they might be across the globe, on advancing these ideas. And so we will actually, one of our sessions will be comparing and contrasting Fort Zed to Greenlease, which is a smart cities concept in the Grenoble region of France. And so we can have some really great learning going back and forth on some of the lessons learned and next steps, and inform our projects here.
Great. So talk a little bit about some of the other areas we're going to cover, this topic of net zero water and net zero transportation, smart cities. What are some of the topics we'll cover in those areas at the conference?
Well, I think I'll discuss the transportation one a little bit, and then Judy maybe can pick up a couple of others. As we look forward in transportation, I think about a year and a half ago, we became members of the Electrification Coalition as a community, which is all about electric vehicle transportation and driving down carbon emissions through effective other strategies rather than fossil fuels. And Additionally, there's a lot of groundbreaking research being done at Colorado State University regarding low emissions vehicles. And so this one part of this conference is going to explore that whole topic about whether electric vehicles are the best strategy, whether low emission vehicles are, and really kind of delve into that in some depth. And I think that in itself will be a very engaging conversation. Additionally, we'll be talking about transit and alternative forms of transit, getting people out of their cars, having walkable communities where people can get out, take bicycles, and have effective transit that works around that. To that degree, we'll have a specific session on urban design and how the design of cities can reduce our carbon footprint and help us to kind of move towards net zero through just pure city planning.
Mm-hmm. What did you ask me about water?
Oh, just
right? Yeah.
Water or smart cities,
Yeah.
what?
I have to give Bruce some credit here on the water topic because it was last year, the first net zero cities, where he said, I'd like to have water introduced next year, and what would that look like? And so the Colorado Water Innovation Cluster, as well as Brendel Group, we have been working on, well, if we know what net zero carbon looks like, how to do a carbon footprint and plan to carbon neutrality, and we know how to do our energy baseline and forecast and plan to energy independence, by extension, what would that look like for water? Mm-hmm. And there have been protocols now developed around doing your water footprint, but there's been less developed about what does that mean on then driving to net zero water. On the water side, it's especially interesting because we have not just how much water you use, but what are your impacts on water quality, which we've seen significantly in the wake of the flooding and what has happened surrounding that in water quality, or even wildfires and water quality. So it has a very powerful paradigm for water quality and quantity planning. So we brought that concept on the road to Water Smart Innovations last year. We've partnered now with the American Water Works Association and their sustainable water management efforts, and are rolling out Net Zero Water as the next initiative of the Colorado Water Innovation Cluster at Net Zero Cities. So there'll be 3 sessions. The first one is about net zero water planning and toolkits and pilot projects. Our main partner there is the US EPA, has an entire mix of research experts working on net zero water in partnership with the Department of Defense, because a lot of the defense installations in our country have mandates around net zero energy, carbon, and water. Mm-hmm. So it's an interesting partnership there to look at cities and defense installations in the communities in which they operate. Then in the second session, we're looking at ecosystem services. Water migrates upstream from the built environment to your watershed and the natural environment. So there's a lot of emphasis around stewardship of that watershed, but then creating market mechanisms or other policy mechanisms to really help protect the watershed. Not unlike we have carbon credits or renewable energy credits, what would a market look like for water quality trading credits or water quantity credits within the watershed? So that's very exciting. We have the Nature Conservancy involved with that, and other organizations to really help drive that forward. Then the third, it gets to the interrelationship of all of these things and the systems approach, which a lot of our stakeholders were saying you must have a systems approach, and that's looking at greenhouse gas-free or carbon neutral water and wastewater facilities. So if you look at the whole city as a system, the water resources are energy intensive. Mm-hmm. So if we can innovate around supplying that water and water reuse and so forth through greenhouse gas-free ways, it really helps with multiple benefits. So that's the kind of design and rationale behind the water segment. And again, have to give credit to Bruce for really putting that vision out there, and it has driven a lot of discussion and action in our region and nationally. So we're pretty excited to continue that dialogue and start doing some actionable projects following Net Zero Cities.
Great. And Judy, your background is, your firm, the Brendel Group, is an engineering firm. Mm-hmm. So, these are the kinds of projects you're normally involved in, right? These are, talk in general terms a little bit about what it is you do in your day job. What is that all about?
Yeah, so for my day job, I am an engineer, and our engineering consulting practice is at this intersection of engineering and sustainability, so carbon, water, energy, et cetera. And so it's a nice opportunity for us to host some of our customers and some of our partners at Net Zero Cities. We have some customers, I haven't got to share with Bruce, some of our customers from Utah coming to Colorado. It's always great to have people come to your home and meet your people and show them what we're doing in this region. So we have invited a number of our customers from throughout the U.S. and are excited to host them here in our hometown later this month.
Great. And Bruce, your background is as a landscape architect?
Yes, it is, and land planning and working in sustainable design for many, many years. And so I'm now evolving into the role of sustainability officer and trying to drive that forward. This is a great opportunity.
So what's the one takeaway you want people to get out of Net Zero Cities this year? Why don't we, Judy, let's start with you. If there's one message that you could take away from this conference, what would it be?
I guess I'd go back to what my previous comment, zero is good. Zero is a good thing. Zero is great. And come learn about that and get involved.
For me, I think, given the partners that are coming and the folks that will be there, I really want this to be a call to action. And I'd like for people to come here and really understand that zero is not only it's a very positive way to think about things, that I think as we see this beginnings of a renaissance that I mentioned, I'd like for people to leave here thinking, wow, this is really a good direction that we're heading. And it's not only as a city of Fort Collins and Boulder and Longmont and Loveland, but it's as a planet that people take this away. We realize that we're all working together to address a global issue, and for me, that's a first. And if for people to work together to a common issue like this, it's almost unprecedented in human society. So for me, it would be get engaged, become a part, and really an invitation to people to get involved.
Well, thank you both very much for joining us today. And next time on Full Circle, we're going to talk a little bit about the triple bottom line and what that means. So thanks for joining us.